Now, what else will he do? Well, he's got some other things he wants to do. And in John chapter 15, verse 11, John 15, verse 11, I don't need to look it up, I know it. Jesus said that his joy would remain, that your joy would be full. Now, most of us don't know what the word joy means. We don't have a clue. We think it means da-da-da. You know, you see people, oh, praise the Lord, hey, how are you? Well, I just get tired when I see them because I just can't act that way. So I looked up the word joy in the dictionary. Have you ever looked up words that you thought you knew in the dictionary? You'd just be amazed at what it says. Now, I looked up the word joy. Now, listen carefully, and then I'll help you understand. In the original Webster's Dictionary, it says joy is a delight of the mind that you will possess a good. Now, people say to me, a good what? You didn't finish the sentence. Yeah, that's the end of the sentence. I don't know what good you'll get. But joy is not the way you feel. Joy is what you know. You got it? Now, you think about that. Joy is a delight of the mind. Now, let's go back to the day in the hospital. I was not excited over what had happened to my little boy, my little grandson. But I was excited that God is supreme. He is omnipotent and omniscient. He is love. He is good. He knows what he's doing, and he always wants the best for us. It's just that sometimes God's best is not what I think of as my best. Now, on the way home from the hospital, when I began to think about who God is, I began to realize that he has a plan. Though it differs from mine, it's the best. And I began to get excited. Now, I continued to cry. I have continued to cry. Even now, sometimes I cry. But it's been a thrilling thing to see what God has done in the life of my sweet friend. Now, when Jesus hung on the cross, if you really want to confirm that this is true, you think about the verse that says, for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross and despised the shame. Now, how could you have joy as you endure and despise? Because joy is not a feeling. Joy is what you know. Now, what did Jesus know? How many of you think he went in there and he was just so excited that he was going to be beaten to death and he was going to be stripped naked and hung on a cross? He was humiliated. He despised it and endured it. Why? Because he knew the benefit. See, he knew that one day I was desperate. I could get on my knees and I could ask him to give me that abundant life that was made possible to me because he suffered and died. We just make so light of it. That's joy. And he said, my joy will remain. Your joy can be full. You know how we view joy? Well, joy is there as long as everything's going great. But then let something intersect my path that disappoints me or breaks my heart. And what happens? My joy disappears. And when will it come back? When it's resolved. No. Jesus said, that it will remain. Now, joy produces a feeling. It is not one. Joy produces it. Now, in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 and 4, you'll find another promise of God. He says there that he's the God of all comfort. And he will comfort you in all your tribulation. There's that word. Now, he says you'll have tribulation on this earth. If you hadn't, just wait, you'll get it. You'll get it. But he said, I will comfort you that you may be able to comfort others with the same comfort whereby you were comforted. When Sam and I were young Christians, we we met a man named Dr. Henry Brandt. And Dr. Brandt told me that if you have a Bible verse, you have an answer. If you don't have a Bible verse to back up what you say, you just have an opinion. And he said, if you want to give people your opinion, I don't care. But tell them it's your opinion. But if they ask you a question and you have a Bible verse and you give it to them, that's an answer. Boy, that set me free. That set me free because I knew then that I had to spend a lot of time in this book to find out what it said, because I had a desire to help people in trouble emotionally. Dr. Brandt taught me that verse. He said, you see, it doesn't matter what happens to you, Mary Glynn. God said He would comfort you in all your tribulation, and He just pounded that verse into me. Well, Dr. Brandt's wife of 43 years died of cancer, and 1 year later he remarried. Married a wonderful, wonderful lady. She was perfect for him. And 4 years after they married, they came to see us. Henry was going to speak at a men's retreat, and she was going to stay with me. We were picking him up at a designated point at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It was 4 o'clock, and we went by my friend's house so they could meet, and we had tea and coffee, cake. And Marcy was telling my friend how she became a Christian. And all of a sudden, Marcy put her hands up on her temples, and she looked at me. I just met her. She looked at me and she said, Mary Glynn, something is wrong with me. And then she turned to Sam and she said, Sam, would you help me? And we put her on the floor, Sam taking her pulse, put her feet in a chair. She asked me to rub her neck. My friend ran to get some ice. And Marcy died. She had a massive cerebral hemorrhage. She was 52 years old, in perfect health, and she died right there. Now, my friend and I had to go get Dr. Brandt. How would you like to have been on that trip? They'd just married. He couldn't keep his hands off of her. He was 70 years old. I sat there that night before and watched him, and I wondered if when Sam was 70, he'd be that way. And he is. Dr. Brandt got in the car, and we told him basically what had happened. He didn't say a word. He said, let's go. Sam had taken her to the hospital in the ambulance, in the emergency. And on the way, we heard Dr. Brandt's voice. And this is what he said. He said, God, in your word, you promised to comfort us in all our tribulation. Now we have it. And so I expect you to do what you said you would do. And that's all he said. On that next day, we had to help him prepare her body, all the arrangements to get her home to Iowa, where she was from. It was a hectic day. And I'll never forget Monday morning, he came in to get a cup of coffee. Great, big, blue-eyed German, strong. And he was crying. He put his head on my shoulder. He put his arms around me and sobbed. He said, this morning when I waked up, I realized Marcy's gone and she's not going to come back. And he said, Mary Glynn, I just don't know what I'm going to do without her. But he looked at me and he said, it's a strange thing that I have a sense of joy in my heart. He said, 40 years ago, I committed my life to the Lord, and He's never let me down. He said, do you think He'll start today? And I said, no, I don't think so. We took him to the airport. We drove up to the airport, and he said, please let me get out by myself. Don't come in with me. He said, I have to go alone now. I want to tell you, that was about 12 years ago. But I remember when he got out of the car and he walked through the door at the airport, I said, God, how I thank you that you brought him here to take her home. How I thank you that I had the rare opportunity to see my teacher put what he teaches into practice. You see, that's rare. You can hear a lot of good messages, but you really don't see that many good walks. And so I asked God to do something for me. I asked Him to let me walk the talk or shut my mouth. And I thought how much it means to me, because I could get so mad at Dr. Brandt. He could just say things that I didn't want to hear. But he's one of the few people I've ever met that would risk my friendship to tell me the truth. And what confidence I've always had in what he said. And so I prayed, God, let me be an example to people. Let me teach your word, but let me walk it. And I challenge you. The world is looking for leadership. Not necessarily Washington or the state capitals, but in the churches and in the business world and in the hospitals and in the homes and in the PTAs. And you need to be a leader. But it needs to be okay for people to follow you. You see, I had to look in the face of my little girl one day and say, can I recommend my lifestyle to her? Can I say to her, when you grow up, I want you to be like me? I couldn't say that. And I say to men all the time, do you hope your son will end up like you? And you know what most men say to me? Bragging. Well, I hope he's better than I am. And then I always say to them, they don't like it ever. What's wrong with you? So you must be doing something wrong if you don't want your child to end up like you. Are you willing to change for your child? Are you willing to be the person God wants you to be a leader in your home and make it okay? That doesn't mean you don't make mistakes, but you admit it and you go before the Lord and then you apologize if you need to. Now the third and final thing, God will give you peace. And that's John chapter 16, verse 33. You know that's the last thing Jesus said to his disciples before he went into the garden to pray and he was arrested and he was crucified and he rose from the dead. That's the last thing he said. And he said, these things I have spoken unto you. Now when Jesus was speaking, Jesus was teaching. And when I'm speaking, I am teaching. He said, these things I have spoken unto you, that in me you might have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. But be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. That's a strange Bible verse. It really does have a bad effect on people. You know, people come and they tell me their story is tragedy, it's horrible. I never heard of such. They just get worse. And I say, look, I got a verse for you. Jesus said, I'll give you peace. Cheer up. They look at me like, you have lost your mind. What do you mean, cheer up? I'm not about to cheer up. Well, don't. I don't care. It's your business. But once again, I didn't write that. I didn't say it. Jesus said it. You know what they say about me? I don't have any compassion. Isn't that funny? My daughter-in-law said to me last week, God, Mary Glynn, she said, I can't wait to start teaching this. It's so freeing. She said, you know, it saves you so much time. I never thought of that. She said, you don't have to go find people to pat you on the back and affirm you all the time. You can just be cheerful in the midst of tribulation because you can have peace. Isn't that great? How many of you think that's the greatest thing a grandmother could hear from the mother of her children? Isn't that exciting? That's the way we need to be. Cheer up. He's overcome the world. He knows what he's doing, and he knows why it's doing it, and you don't need to know. I remember my Bible teacher said, when you try to understand things in the Bible you can't understand, you're sticking your nose in God's business. And you need to keep your nose out of his business. Have you ever said why? Have you ever said why me? Well, I have, but I've quit. I've quit. I just say, thank you, Lord. You convict me if you need to, so that I can have a clean heart. And your joy will remain in me. And my joy will be full. And I can trust you as I walk through this tribulation, because I got to walk through it. You can't get around it. You got to go through it. But the choice is yours. You can go through it joyful, loving, comfortable, and peaceful if you want to. Now, I give you a challenge. I don't want you to talk to anybody about this. It's too personal. But I want you, when you get alone, to ask yourself, do you really want to be that way? Do you really want to be a loving, joyful, comfortable, peaceful, cheerful person? God gave you the right to make that decision. If you don't want to, He ain't going to force you to. But I remember another thing that Dr. Brent said to me one time. This is critical. He said, you know, Mary Glynn, if you're a person that has to have your way all the time, people will get out of your way. And he said, so if you go through life having to have your way, people are going to get out of your way. And so you're preparing yourself for a life of loneliness. And that's a miserable life. Because we're all like sheep. And sheep are herd animals. And we need each other. But we need each other to enjoy with each other what God is doing in our heart. Thank you.